Every head in the ballroom turned toward the woman rising near the center table. Her chair scraped softly across the marble floor. Not loud. Just sharp enough to cut through the violin music. Richard Whitmore straightened beside the doorway. The guard beside me loosened his grip for half a second. That was all I needed to pull my wrist free. Rain rolled down the tall glass windows behind the entrance. Outside, the blocked SUVs sat under the yellow glow of the driveway lamps like trapped shadows. The scanner near the gate flashed red again. Denied entry. Denied entry. Denied entry. The sound kept echoing through the wet night air. The woman who stood was older. Maybe late 50s. Silver earrings. Dark green gown. Calm posture. But the room shifted around her instantly. Some guests lowered their eyes. Others leaned back in their seats. Respect moved through the ballroom before she even spoke. Evelyn Brooks. I recognized her the moment she stepped closer to the stage lights. Most people in the city did. Hospitals. Scholarship funds. Half the museum wing downtown carried her family name. Richard forced a smile that did not reach his eyes. Evelyn, he said carefully, we are handling a small security issue. I can see that, she replied. Her voice stayed smooth and low. That made the silence around her heavier. She looked at me next. Not at my uniform. Not at the tray still trembling slightly in my hand. At me. It had been a long time since someone in a room like this did that. One of the board members cleared his throat nervously. Another guest whispered something behind a champagne glass. I caught only 2 words. Service staff. Evelyn ignored them. Why is the south gate closed? She asked. Richard glanced toward the windows. Temporary inconvenience. There are ambulances scheduled for the pediatric donors arriving tonight. The room shifted again. Tiny movements. Tight shoulders. Eyes turning toward Richard now instead of me. He adjusted his cuffs slowly. We are resolving it. I almost laughed at that. The only reason the emergency lane still functioned was because I refused to surrender my access device. Rainwater dripped from the edge of my sleeve onto the marble floor. Cold air slipped through the partly opened entrance doors. Somewhere deeper inside the ballroom, silverware clinked against china. Dinner service had stalled. Guests were noticing. Evelyn stepped closer. Who authorized removing her access? She asked. Richard's expression hardened. Evelyn, this is not your concern. It became my concern when your security tried taking her phone. A few heads turned sharply at that. The guard beside me looked down immediately. Richard noticed it too. His jaw tightened again. He hated losing control in public. Men like him built entire lives around never appearing embarrassed. A camera flash went off near the back tables. Someone from local media. Richard heard it. So did everyone else. The violinists slowly stopped playing. That silence felt worse. I shifted the tray onto my other hand. My fingers were starting to ache from holding it steady. Evelyn noticed. Set that down before you drop it, she said gently. I placed the tray on a nearby cocktail table. The glasses rattled softly against each other. One nearly tipped over before settling still. Richard took a slow breath. Naomi, he said, finally using my name, you are overstepping your role tonight. That landed colder than shouting would have. Several guests relaxed slightly after hearing my name. Humanizing me made them less uncomfortable. But not enough. I looked toward the stage banner again. Dignity begins with who we choose to see. Gold letters across white silk. Beautiful from a distance. Hollow up close. Evelyn followed my eyes to the banner. Something unreadable crossed her face. Then she looked back at Richard. Did you write that speech yourself? she asked quietly. Richard blinked once. Just once. But I saw it. A crack. Small. Real. The ballroom noticed too. Nobody moved now. Nobody even reached for their drinks. Outside, another SUV pulled into the rain-soaked driveway behind the blocked gate. Then blue emergency lights appeared at the far end of the road. The blue lights flashed harder against the wet windows as the ambulance rolled closer to the blocked gate. Several guests turned fully now. No more pretending not to notice. The room had crossed that line already. Richard Whitmore looked toward the driveway with the expression of a man calculating damage faster than emotion. Why is emergency access still restricted? Evelyn asked. Her voice stayed calm. That calmness kept cutting deeper. Richard motioned sharply toward the security desk near the entrance. Open the gate. Tom Grayson swallowed once before answering. The system override is still linked to her device. His eyes flicked toward me. The silence that followed felt expensive. Heavy watches. Crystal glasses. Wet silk gowns. Everything in the ballroom suddenly seemed too polished for what was happening near the doors. I reached slowly into my apron pocket and pulled out the control phone. Tiny raindrops still clung to the screen from outside set up earlier that evening. The fire marshal had insisted the emergency route stay active during guest arrivals. Richard ignored him then too. Give it to security, Richard said. I did not move. The ambulance lights kept flashing beyond the gate. Red. Blue. Red again. The pediatric donor from St. Matthew's is inside that vehicle, I said quietly. There is a child with oxygen support in there. That changed the room instantly. One woman near the stage lowered a hand to her throat. Another guest whispered, "Oh my God," under his breath. Somewhere behind the ballroom tables, a waiter stopped walking completely. Richard's face tightened. He hated public complications. Especially ones involving children. Especially during a charity gala. Evelyn stepped closer to me now instead of him. I noticed that. So did everyone else. How long has the access lane been blocked? She asked. Since 6:40, I answered. The florist trucks were parked across the emergency turnaround. Tom shifted uncomfortably. We were reorganizing vehicle flow. You ignored safety protocol, I replied. Not loudly. That made it land harder. Rain hammered briefly against the glass ceiling above the entrance hall. The weather had worsened fast. Wind pushed cold mist through the partly open doors. I could smell wet pavement and diesel from the waiting vehicles outside. The scanner beeped again. Then stopped completely. My stomach tightened. That was not normal. I looked down at the phone in my hand. Connection lost. The gate system monitor had frozen. Richard saw my expression immediately. What now? He demanded. I tapped the screen once. Nothing moved. The storm probably knocked the wireless relay offline. Tom cursed softly under his breath. Evelyn looked between us. Can the gate still open? I already knew the answer. But I wished I did not. Only manually from the lower utility panel, I said. Outside. Another crack of thunder rolled above the ballroom. A few guests flinched. Somewhere deeper inside the hotel, the lights flickered once before stabilizing again. Tiny reactions spread through the room like ripples in water. Nervous glances. Tight mouths. Quiet calculations. The gala suddenly felt fragile. Richard stepped closer to me until I could smell bourbon and cedar cologne beneath the rain in the air. Then go open it. There it was. Not a request. Not concern. Just command. Like I was machinery he could point at problems. I held his gaze for the first time all night. The lower utility corridor flooded earlier. His jaw hardened. How deep? Almost knee-high by 7 o'clock. Tom looked alarmed now. Why was that not reported upstairs? It was, I answered. Twice. Evelyn turned slowly toward Richard. The expression on her face changed then. Smaller. Sharper. Like someone beginning to understand the shape of a lie. Richard opened his mouth to answer, but another sound cut through the ballroom first. A weak crackling voice over the emergency radio near the security desk. Unit 3 to ballroom entrance. We have a medical issue inside vehicle 1. Nobody spoke after that. Then Richard finally looked scared. The room moved all at once after that radio call. Chairs scraped backward. Conversations broke apart mid-sentence. Someone near the stage dropped a fork onto a china plate and the sharp metal sound bounced through the ballroom like shattered glass. Richard Whitmore grabbed the edge of a nearby table hard enough to wrinkle the white linen cloth beneath his hand. What kind of medical issue? He asked toward the security desk. Static crackled through the radio. First. Then a strained voice answered. Young female patient. Oxygen flow unstable. We still cannot clear vehicle access. A hush fell over the entrance again. It felt colder now. Not because of the rain. Because everyone suddenly understood this was real. Evelyn Brooks turned toward me immediately. Can the utility panel still be reached? I nodded once. Yes. But somebody has to reset the manual relay from below. Tom Grayson stepped in quickly. Maintenance can handle it. Maintenance left at 7, I replied. You sent them home after the donor walkthrough. Tom looked away. Another uncomfortable silence. Richard's eyes narrowed at him. Tiny cracks were spreading everywhere now. Small lies. Bad decisions. Corners cut to impress wealthy guests. The kind of shortcuts nobody notices until pressure hits the building all at once. Outside, thunder rolled low over the property. The rain came harder against the tall windows. Water streaked down the glass in crooked silver lines. I could barely see the ambulance lights anymore through the storm. Evelyn folded her arms tightly across her gown. How long until that child loses oxygen support? Nobody answered immediately. That silence lasted too long. A waiter near the back slowly lowered a tray of untouched wine glasses onto a serving cart. Another staff member crossed herself quietly near the kitchen doors. Richard finally looked at me again. You know how to reach the relay? Yes. Then go. His tone still carried authority, but fear had slipped underneath it now. Thin. Sharp. Human. I looked toward the flooded lower corridor through the side hallway entrance. Emergency lights glowed faintly down there, reflecting against damp concrete walls. I remembered the smell already. Standing water. Bleach. Wet wiring insulation. The water level may have reached the secondary breaker, I said. If the relay shorts during reset, the entire south wing loses power. Several guests murmured under their breath. The ballroom chandeliers suddenly felt fragile overhead. Evelyn stepped closer to me again. Can anyone else do it? Not fast enough. Richard exhaled through his nose hard enough for me to hear it. He hated needing me. That part showed clearly now. More clearly than the anger earlier. I picked up the control phone again and checked the frozen gate system screen one more time. Still dead. The storm had fully knocked the wireless bridge offline. Only the manual override remained. Somewhere behind us, the charity auction monitor still displayed smiling photos of children from St. Matthew's Hospital. Soft piano music played under the slideshow. The timing almost felt cruel. A little girl on the screen wore a knitted purple cap and held up a handwritten sign that read "Thank you for helping us breathe." Nobody looked at the screens anymore. Tom rubbed the back of his neck uneasily. I can send 2 guards down with her. The lower corridor is too narrow once the flood barriers close, I answered. Only 1 person fits through safely. Richard looked irritated again. Fear was making him meaner now instead of calmer. Then stop wasting time. Evelyn's head turned sharply toward him. That is enough, Richard. Her voice cut cleaner than shouting could have. The room went still again. Richard opened his mouth, then stopped himself. His public mask was slipping faster now. The storm outside shook the windows with another burst of wind. The lights flickered once more across the ballroom ceiling. This time several guests gasped softly. I looked down at my soaked sleeve. My wrist still carried faint red marks where security grabbed me earlier. Funny how quickly people forget that part once they need something. I handed the tray fully off to a nearby server. My fingers felt stiff from the cold. The relay room is 2 levels below the south hall, I said quietly. If I reset it manually, the gates should reopen for about 90 seconds. Tom stared at me. Only 90. That is all backup power allows during a relay failure. Richard finally understood what that meant. 1 chance. 1 opening. 1 mistake away from complete shutdown. The ambulance lights outside flashed weakly through the rain again. Then the ballroom speakers suddenly emitted a low electrical hum. The low hum from the ballroom speakers deepened for 3 seconds before cutting out completely. Music vanished. The auction screens flickered black. A few chandeliers dimmed overhead, throwing the room into a softer, colder light. Gasps moved through the tables in scattered waves. Somebody near the stage whispered, "Please tell me the power is not failing." I already knew the answer to that. The relay system was bleeding load across the south wing. If the backup transfer stalled much longer, the emergency lane, ballroom network, and oxygen support vehicles outside would all compete for the same reserve circuit. Richard Whitmore rubbed both hands across his face once. Fast. Sharp. Like he was trying to wipe panic off his skin before anyone saw it. Evelyn Brooks stayed still beside me. Her eyes moved from the dark auction monitors to the rain outside the windows. How much time do we have? She asked quietly. I checked the frozen system phone again even though it still showed no connection. Habit more than hope. Maybe 10 minutes before the reserve battery cycles down. Tom Grayson muttered a curse under his breath. One of the younger board members looked genuinely pale now. The room smelled different suddenly. Less like perfume and wine. More like damp carpet and overheated wiring. Tiny details people only notice when comfort starts slipping away. Another crackle burst through the security radio. Vehicle 1 oxygen warning active. Repeat. Warning active. Nobody ignored it this time. Richard looked toward the entrance doors again. Rainwater blew sideways across the stone driveway outside. The ambulance headlights glowed weakly through the storm like fading eyes. Go open the relay, Richard said. His voice had lost most of its polish now. He sounded tired. Cornered. I studied him for a second. Funny how quickly powerful people become ordinary once systems stop obeying them. The lower corridor needs manual drainage release first, I said. Otherwise the relay room door will not open fully. Tom blinked hard. You never mentioned that. Nobody asked. That landed harder than I intended. Evelyn looked at me carefully after that. Not offended. Curious. Like she was trying to understand how long I had been carrying this entire evening on my shoulders while being treated like background furniture. Another flash of lightning illuminated the ballroom windows bright white for half a second. In that instant, every expensive face in the room looked smaller somehow. Less untouchable. A server hurried past carrying battery lanterns from the storage closet. The candles on the dining tables suddenly mattered more than the crystal chandeliers overhead. "Tell me exactly what you need," Evelyn said. I turned toward the side hallway leading downstairs. "There is a flood valve beside the utility corridor entrance. Red will handle. It has to stay open while somebody resets the relay manually." Tom frowned. "That valve sticks under pressure." "I know. Then 2 people should go. 2 people will not fit once the flood barrier closes." Richard exhaled sharply through his nose again. He was losing patience because he was losing control. The 2 things always travel together with men like him. "Enough explaining," he snapped. "Just fix it." Evelyn's eyes hardened immediately. "Richard." One word. Quiet. Heavy. He looked away first. That mattered more than anybody in the room realized. I slipped the control phone into my apron pocket and reached for the emergency flashlight clipped beside the security desk. My fingers brushed cold metal. Tom stepped toward me awkwardly. "Naomi." I paused. His voice sounded different now. Less certain. "The lower hall lights may fail completely." "I know. There is exposed conduit near the second stairwell." "I know that too." He looked embarrassed after that. Maybe because I knew the building better than the people running it. Maybe because he remembered grabbing my wrist 30 minutes earlier like I did not belong near any of this. The emergency radio crackled once more. This time the voice sounded strained. Breathing hard. "We need access immediately." A child coughed faintly somewhere behind the transmission. The sound barely lasted 2 seconds. It still changed the room. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly after hearing it. Several guests lowered their heads. Even Richard stopped talking. Rain hammered against the glass ceiling above us hard enough to drown out everything else for a moment. Then the ballroom. Lights flickered again. Longer this time. When they stabilized, only half the chandeliers came back on. I tightened my grip around the flashlight. Then somebody reached for my arm before I could enter the hallway. The hand on my arm was smaller than I expected. Warm too. I turned and found Evelyn Brooks standing close enough to smell rainwater caught in the fabric of her shawl. The ballroom lights flickered softly behind her face. "You should not go down there alone," she said. Her voice stayed low so the room could not feed on the moment. I glanced toward the dark hallway entrance. "There is no time to organize anything else." "Then I am coming with you." Several people reacted instantly. Tom Grayson stepped forward first. "Absolutely not." Richard Whitmore looked stunned for half a second before irritation replaced it. "Evelyn, this is ridiculous." She did not even look at him. That silence hit him harder than an argument would have. Outside, thunder rolled again across the property. The ambulance lights still flashed through the rain beyond the blocked gate. Slower now somehow. Or maybe it only felt that way. I adjusted the flashlight in my grip. "The lower corridor is narrow," I told her. "Flood barriers close automatically if water pressure rises again. Then we move quickly." Tom shook his head hard. "Mrs. Brooks, the utility level is not safe. Neither is trapping a child outside during a storm." Nobody answered that. A waiter near the side tables slowly lowered his eyes toward the carpet. Another staff member stopped pretending to rearrange silverware and listened openly now. The room had changed sides without admitting it aloud. Richard finally stepped closer. "Evelyn, donors are here. Press is here. This entire event is balancing on a thread already. Then perhaps you should have protected the thread better." His face tightened immediately. Tiny flashes of anger kept slipping through the polished version of him. I noticed something else too. He no longer looked at me with dismissal. Now he looked at me like a problem he could not afford. That was different. The ballroom speakers crackled faintly overhead again before dying into static. Somewhere deeper inside the hotel, a generator kicked on with a low mechanical groan. Half the room dimmed another shade darker. Candlelight became stronger than electricity around the dining tables. Shadows stretched longer across the marble floor. The atmosphere felt softer now. Stranger too. Like wealth itself had become less solid in the dark. I looked toward the hallway again. Water glimmered faintly under the emergency lights beyond the corner. The flood level was rising. We were running out of time. The relay room is past the second utility stairwell, I said quietly. Once we open the drainage valve, somebody has to hold it manually while the other person resets the transfer switch. Evelyn nodded immediately. Then we each take one. Tom stared at her like she had spoken another language. You cannot be serious. I am perfectly serious. Richard rubbed his temple slowly. His cufflinks caught the weak ballroom light. If either of you gets hurt down there, the liability alone, Evelyn cut him off with one look. A child cannot breathe, Richard. Silence again. Heavy. Final. Even he knew better than to answer that wrong. I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out the folded arrivals list. Rain had smudged the ink near the edges earlier. I scanned the first vehicle line quickly. Pediatric donor transport. Female. Age 8. Respiratory support. St. Matthew's Foundation Program. 8 years old. Something in my chest tightened quietly after reading that. My younger brother spent almost 3 winters on oxygen support before he died. Not many people knew that. Not because it was secret. Because nobody ever asked enough questions to hear it. Evelyn noticed my eyes pause on the list. She did not ask why. Somehow that mattered. Tom handed me a second flashlight without speaking. His hand looked tense now. Uneasy. The lower stair rail is loose near the landing, he muttered. And the west pipe valve sticks at 40% rotation. I blinked once. He was helping now. Tiny practical truths. The kind people only offer once pride stops running the room. Thank you, I said softly. He looked embarrassed after hearing that. Another cough crackled faintly over the emergency radio from outside. Then a strained paramedic voice followed. Oxygen reserves dropping faster than expected. The ballroom seemed to freeze around that sentence. No music. No silverware. No fake laughter anymore. Just rain and failing lights and expensive people forced to confront something real. Evelyn moved beside me toward the hallway entrance. Her heels clicked once against marble before disappearing onto damp concrete flooring below the corridor lights. Richard called after us suddenly. Naomi. I stopped but did not turn around immediately. His voice sounded different now too. Smaller somehow. If the relay overloads, he said carefully, the ballroom loses power completely. I finally looked back at him. Then maybe everybody here will see each other clearly for once. After that, the lower hallway lights went out completely. Darkness swallowed the lower hallway for one long second before the emergency strips along the baseboards flickered on in dull red lines. The air down there felt colder immediately. Damp concrete. Rust. Standing water. The smell wrapped around us the deeper we moved below the ballroom. Evelyn Brooks steadied one hand against the wall as her heels slipped slightly on the wet floor. I angled my flashlight downward. Water moved slowly across the corridor in shallow ripples, reflecting red emergency light across the ceiling like bloodless waves. Somewhere above us, thunder shook the building again. The pipes answered with a low metallic groan. How much farther? Evelyn asked softly. Her voice echoed against the narrow corridor walls. Past the second stairwell. I kept walking. My shoes pushed through cold water with each step. The flashlight beam swept across exposed pipes, electrical conduit, and gray flood barriers lining both sides of the corridor. One of the barriers had already partially deployed. That was not good. It meant water pressure outside the retaining wall was still rising. Evelyn noticed it too. Can those barriers lock fully? Automatically if pressure sensors trip. And if they close while we are down here? I looked ahead instead of answering immediately. Then we wait until somebody opens them from upstairs. The silence after that stretched too long. A pipe dripped steadily somewhere ahead. Tiny metallic taps against standing water. Sharp. Rhythmic. The building sounded alive underneath the gala. Breathing through wires and pressure valves and failing circuits. We turned the first corner. The emergency lights flickered weakly again. This time they stayed dimmer afterward. I could hear Evelyn's breathing more clearly now. Controlled. Calm. But heavier than upstairs. Nobody over 50 belonged knee-deep inside a flooded utility tunnel during a charity dinner. Yet there she was. That mattered more than she probably understood. We reached the first flood valve station. The large red wheel sat half-submerged beside the wall. Water swirled slowly around the metal housing. I crouched and aimed the flashlight closer. The pressure lock already engaged, I murmured. Evelyn leaned slightly nearer. Is that bad? It means the outer drainage pumps failed before the relay system. Her expression sharpened immediately. So they knew the building had flood issues before tonight. I tightened my jaw. Probably. Another tiny silence. Then Evelyn said something very quiet. Richard signed off on the maintenance cuts last spring. I looked up at her after hearing that. She looked angry now. Not dramatic anger. Worse. The kind that settles cold behind the eyes after disappointment finally hardens into certainty. Somewhere above us, the muffled sound of ballroom applause suddenly erupted through the ceiling. Strange. Out of place. We both froze for a second listening to it. What are they applauding? Evelyn whispered. I already knew. The live donation board probably came back online. She stared upward through concrete and steel. A child is trapped outside in an ambulance. I know. The applause faded slowly overhead. Hollow. Distant. Like another world continuing without us. I wrapped both hands around the red wheel valve and pulled hard. It resisted immediately. Metal screamed softly against pressure. Cold water surged around my knees. It is stuck, Evelyn said. It always sticks near 40%. I planted 1 foot harder against the concrete floor and pulled. Again. This time the valve shifted slightly. A deep mechanical vibration rolled through the pipe system beneath us. Somewhere farther down the corridor, water began draining through unseen channels with a loud sucking sound. The flood level dropped almost an inch immediately. Evelyn exhaled quietly. Good. Not yet. I stood quickly. The relay room is ahead. We pushed deeper down the corridor. The emergency lights flickered again, weaker than before. One went completely dark behind us. Then another. The tunnel narrowed sharply near the second stairwell exactly like I remembered. Exposed conduit lined the walls inches from the water level now. Tiny sparks snapped briefly from one loose junction box before dying again into darkness. Evelyn flinched backward instinctively. Careful, I said immediately. Stay left. She nodded once. No panic. Just focus. We moved slowly through the narrow passage. The farther we went, the louder the building sounded. Pumps straining. Pipes rattling. Electrical systems fighting to stay alive. Then my flashlight beam finally landed on the relay room door ahead. Half submerged. Crooked on its hinges. And something else. The manual override lever was already down. For 1 second neither of us moved. Water pushed softly against the relay room door while my flashlight beam stayed fixed on the lowered override lever. The metal handle glistened wet beneath the emergency light. Evelyn stepped closer beside me. "What does that mean?" she asked quietly. My throat tightened. "It means somebody already tried to reset the system." Another deep vibration rolled through the floor beneath us. The building groaned around the sound like an old ship shifting during a storm. I moved toward the door slowly. Water splashed around my knees with each step. The relay room smelled sharp now. Burned dust. Hot metal. Damp insulation. I knew that smell too well. Something inside had overheated before shutdown. The flashlight trembled slightly in my hand as I reached the door. Not fear. Cold. Mostly. I pressed my shoulder against the warped metal and pushed hard. The bottom edge scraped through standing water with a painful grinding sound. Inside, the room flickered under one surviving emergency lamp mounted near the ceiling. Everything else sat in shadow. Large electrical panels lined both walls. Red warning lights blinked weakly across flooded control boxes. Thick cables disappeared into ceiling conduits overhead. Water dripped steadily from exposed pipes near the back wall. Tiny sparks snapped somewhere deep inside the relay housing. Evelyn stopped at the doorway. "Oh my God." The main transfer switch cabinet stood half open near the center platform. Tool marks scarred the latch. Somebody forced it earlier. I swept the flashlight lower. My stomach dropped quietly. A pair of bolt cutters floated near the drainage grate. Richard knew. That thought arrived hard and immediate. He knew the relay system had problems before tonight. Maybe not every detail. But enough. Enough to cut maintenance. Enough to ignore warnings. Enough to gamble that appearances mattered more than repairs. Evelyn stared at the damaged cabinet too. "This was reported, was it not?" she asked softly. I nodded once. 3 times this year. She closed her eyes briefly after hearing that. Then she looked older somehow when she opened them again. Not weak. Just tired in a deeper place. Somewhere above us the ballroom ceiling shook faintly from muffled footsteps. People still moved upstairs. Still drank wine. Still waited for speeches while the building strained underneath them. I stepped carefully toward the main relay cabinet. Water rippled around loose wires drifting near the floor. "Stay near the doorway," I warned Evelyn. "Do not touch the walls." She nodded immediately. No argument. Another tiny spark snapped from inside the transfer housing. I crouched slowly and aimed the flashlight across the lower panel controls. The emergency bypass circuit had fused halfway through activation. That explained the blackout instability. Somebody forced a manual reset without draining the lower channels first. Water reached the relay bed during transfer. Amateur mistake. Dangerous one too. "Can it still work?" Evelyn asked. I studied the damaged panel. Burn marks climbed one side of the switch housing like black veins. But the secondary transfer arm still looked intact. Maybe. If the system held together long enough. "I think so," I said carefully. "But the timing has to be exact now." The emergency lamp overhead flickered twice. The room dimmed sharply before stabilizing again. My pulse kicked harder inside my chest. Backup power was dying faster than expected. I reached for the lower relay housing and stopped suddenly. Fresh fingerprints streaked across the wet metal casing. Recent. The water had not washed them away yet. Someone had been down here very recently. Evelyn noticed my pause. "What is wrong?" I angled the flashlight toward the cabinet surface. She saw the marks immediately. Someone else came down here before us. Silence filled the relay room after that. Heavy. Strange. The building groaned again around us. Water dripped steadily through the ceiling pipes. Somewhere far behind us in the corridor, a flood barrier emitted a slow mechanical warning tone. Evelyn looked back toward the dark hallway. Do you think security tried fixing it first? I stared at the damaged override lever. Then at the bolt cutters floating near the grate. Then at the half-open relay cabinet somebody abandoned in a hurry. No, I said quietly. I think somebody tried hiding it. The emergency lamp flickered harder overhead. Then every warning light on the relay panel suddenly turned red at once. Red warning lights flooded the relay room in sharp pulses. The color washed across the standing water around our legs and turned every ripple dark crimson. A harsh alarm began echoing overhead. Slow at first. Then faster. Evelyn stepped backward instinctively toward the doorway. What does that mean? I moved closer to the relay cabinet instead of answering immediately. The emergency panel screen flickered weakly beneath the warning lights. System failure. Transfer lockout. Reserve power critical. My stomach tightened. The system had entered protection mode. Once the reserve cycle ended, the entire south wing would shut down automatically. No gates. No ballroom network. No emergency support lane. Nothing. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling pipes onto the relay housing beside me. Tiny sparks snapped near the damaged transfer arm. The smell of burned wiring thickened in the air. I crouched lower and ran the flashlight beam across the panel controls. One bypass fuse had been removed completely. Not blown. Removed. My pulse kicked harder. Somebody sabotaged the backup transfer, I said quietly. Evelyn stared at me. Sabotaged? I pointed toward the empty fuse slot. This does not happen by accident. The alarm overhead accelerated again. Fast enough now to make the room feel smaller. Claustrophobic. Somewhere behind us in the corridor, the flood barrier warning tone deepened into a steady mechanical hum. Water pressure was still rising outside the retaining wall. We were running out of time from every direction at once. Evelyn folded one arm tightly across herself against the cold. Why would anyone do this? I already knew the answer before she finished asking. Money. Delays. Inspections avoided. Maintenance contracts postponed. People like Richard Whitmore spent years believing systems existed to protect comfort first and consequences second. Until the consequences arrived anyway. I reached into the open relay housing carefully. Metal felt cold and slick beneath my fingers. The bypass fuse can still be bridged manually, I murmured. But only for one short cycle. Evelyn stepped closer despite the water. Enough to open the gates? Maybe. Maybe is enough right now. That sentence landed quietly between us. Stronger than panic would have. Another loud crack rolled through the building overhead. This time the emergency light above the relay room door failed completely. Only the red warning lamps remained now. The room looked unreal under them. Like something submerged underwater. I shifted my flashlight toward the lower cabinet shelf and froze again. A folded maintenance report sat half-soaked beside the relay housing. The paper edges curled from moisture. I picked it up carefully. Richard Whitmore's signature stretched across the bottom approval line. Deferred repair authorization. South utility drainage and backup relay replacement postponed 90 days. My jaw tightened slowly. Evelyn saw the signature immediately. She did not speak for several seconds. The alarm kept pulsing around us. Red light. Red light. Red again. Finally she whispered, he knew. Not anger this time. Worse. Disappointment stripped completely bare. I folded the soaked paper once and slid it into my apron pocket. Above us, the building lights flickered hard enough to shake shadows across the relay room walls. Then the security radio clipped to my apron crackled alive suddenly. Static burst first. Then Tom Grayson's strained voice. "Naomi, respond." I grabbed the radio immediately. "Go ahead." Heavy breathing answered first. Noise. Shouting somewhere behind him upstairs. "The child in vehicle 1 is crashing," he said. "Paramedics are preparing manual transfer through the rain." Evelyn closed her eyes tightly after hearing that. I tightened my grip around the radio hard enough for my fingers to ache. "You need 90 seconds once the gate opens," I said. "Not a second more." "Can you do it?" Tom asked. Strange hearing fear in his voice now. Real fear. Human fear. I looked toward the damaged relay housing. Toward the missing fuse. Toward the floodwater creeping slowly higher around the cabinet base. Then at Evelyn standing beside me in soaked silk and emergency light like she had stepped out of a different world entirely. "Yes," I said quietly. "But somebody upstairs has been lying to all of you." Silence hit the radio after that. Then another voice entered the transmission unexpectedly. "Richard Whitmore." "Open the gates first," he said tightly. "We will discuss everything else later." I stared at the soaked maintenance report inside my pocket. Then at the sabotaged relay system in front of me. Then at the red warning lights flooding the room like a heartbeat. "No," I answered. "We are discussing it now." The radio stayed silent for 2 long seconds after my answer. Only static and the pulse of the warning alarm filled the relay room. Red light washed across the flooded floor again and again like a heartbeat struggling to continue. Then Richard Whitmore spoke through the transmission, slower this time. "Naomi, a child needs oxygen support right now." I closed my eyes briefly. Rain hammered somewhere deep above the building. Water dripped steadily beside the relay housing. Tiny sparks cracked from the damaged transfer panel near my shoulder. "I know exactly what she needs," I said quietly. "Do you?" Another silence. He did not answer immediately. That told me enough already. Evelyn stood beside the doorway listening carefully now. Not watching the room anymore. Watching him through his voice. Tom Grayson finally cut back into the transmission. "Naomi, people upstairs are hearing parts of this conversation." "Good." The word came out sharper than I intended. My fingers tightened around the radio. The soaked maintenance report pressed cold against my apron pocket. Deferred repairs. Ignored inspections. Emergency systems left vulnerable while ballroom renovations received fresh marble and imported chandeliers. Richard's priorities sat all around us in concrete proof. The relay bypass was tampered with, I continued. The maintenance fuse was physically removed. A murmur of voices crackled faintly behind Tom's side of the radio. Guests. Board members. Staff. Listening now. Really listening for the first time tonight. Richard inhaled slowly through the speaker. "That does not change what matters right now. It changes everything." Evelyn moved closer beside me. Water rippled around her shoes. "Richard," she said calmly toward the radio, "did you postpone the drainage repairs after receiving the safety report?" The question hung there. Heavy. Personal. Human. No ballroom polish left around it anymore. The radio crackled softly. Then Richard answered. "The board voted on several budget reallocations." Evelyn's face hardened instantly. "That is not what I asked." Somewhere above us, the ballroom generator groaned loudly enough to vibrate the ceiling pipes overhead. The reserve system was failing faster. I crouched beside the relay housing again and studied the damaged bypass track. We were nearly out of time for every argument. "The fuse can still be bridged manually," I said. But somebody has to hold the transfer current steady during reset. Evelyn looked down at the flooded floor around the cabinet. Can you do it alone? I already knew the answer. Not safely. The red warning lights pulsed harder across the walls. System failure. Flashed repeatedly on the cracked panel display beside me. Water levels had risen another inch since we entered the room. Tiny electrical snaps echoed beneath the cabinet base now. Dangerous ones. Tom's voice returned over the radio. Tighter now. Naomi, paramedics are preparing to carry the child through the storm on foot. Evelyn covered her mouth briefly after hearing that. I pictured it instantly. Rain. Slippery pavement. Oxygen equipment in high wind. A frightened little girl caught between systems designed by people who never expected consequences to reach them personally. My chest tightened hard enough to hurt. Richard spoke again suddenly. Open the gates first. I will authorize every repair you want afterward. I looked at the relay cabinet. Then at the maintenance report. Then at Evelyn standing ankle-deep in floodwater because she refused to look away tonight. That is the problem, I said softly. You still think this is about authorization. Silence again. Longer this time. Somewhere above us, muffled applause suddenly echoed through the ceiling once more. The donation board upstairs had probably announced another six-figure pledge while a child waited outside in the rain. Evelyn shook her head slowly after hearing it. Sadness crossed her face more than anger now. They do not even understand what is happening beneath them, she whispered. No, I answered. They just finally cannot ignore it anymore. I reached carefully into the relay cabinet and wrapped 2 fingers around the damaged transfer arm. Cold metal vibrated beneath my skin. 1 manual bridge cycle remained. Maybe. If the system held together long enough. The radio crackled violently again. Then a paramedic's strained voice broke through directly this time. We lost primary oxygen flow. Every sound inside the relay room seemed to disappear after that. Even the alarms felt distant suddenly. Then Evelyn stepped forward into the floodwater beside me. Evelyn Brooks stepped beside the relay cabinet before I could stop her. Cold water swirled around the hem of her dark green gown. Red warning lights flashed across her face in slow pulses. She looked nothing like the elegant donor who entered the ballroom an hour earlier. She looked tired. Determined too. Tell me what to do, she said. The alarm overhead kept sounding. Fast now. Urgent. Water dripped from the ceiling pipes onto the cabinet housing beside us. Tiny electrical snaps echoed under the relay platform like insects trapped inside the walls. I looked at the damaged transfer arm again. Then at the exposed bypass channel beside it. If I bridge the circuit manually, I said carefully, someone has to stabilize the transfer lever for 90 seconds. Evelyn nodded immediately. Fine. It may spark. Fine. The pressure lock could force the barriers shut while we are still down here. She held my eyes steadily. Naomi. 1 word. Calm. Certain. I stopped talking after that. The radio crackled softly near my shoulder. Upstairs voices bled through static. Confused guests. Security chatter. Somebody crying quietly in the background. Then Tom Grayson returned again. The child lost consciousness for several seconds, he said tightly. Paramedics regained response. Evelyn lowered her head briefly after hearing that. My chest tightened hard enough to make breathing feel sharp. 8 years old. In the rain because rich people wanted prettier floors before safer wiring. I handed Evelyn the flashlight. Hold the beam steady on the lower relay track. She crouched beside me immediately despite the freezing water. Her hands trembled once before steadying again. Not weakness. Cold. Fear. Human things. The flashlight beam cut across the damaged cabinet interior. Burn marks climbed the bypass housing like dark vines. One wrong contact point and the entire transfer board would die permanently. I slid 2 insulated bridge clamps from the emergency tool tray near the cabinet base. Old equipment. Corroded edges. Maintenance should have replaced them months ago. Probably on the same report sitting soaked inside my apron pocket. Another harsh crack shook through the building overhead. Dust drifted faintly from the ceiling pipes. The flood barrier warning tone deepened again somewhere behind us. Pressure rising. Fast now. Naomi, Evelyn said quietly while keeping the flashlight steady, did Richard know tonight? Would be dangerous. I tightened the first bridge clamp into place. Metal clicked softly beneath my fingers. I think he convinced himself dangerous things only happen to other people. The relay cabinet sparked briefly. Blue light flashed across the water between us. Evelyn did not flinch. Upstairs, the ballroom generator groaned again through the ceiling. Weak. Strained. The entire building sounded exhausted. I reached for the second bypass contact slowly. When I connect this, I said, the gate override will reactivate for 90 seconds exactly. And after that? Either the system stabilizes. I looked toward the flooded corridor behind us. Or everything fails together. Evelyn absorbed that quietly. Then she asked the question nobody upstairs had asked all night. And what happens to you if it fails while your hands are inside that cabinet? I paused. Just for a second. Funny. Everyone else only asked whether the ballroom lights would survive. Whether the gala would survive. Whether the donations would survive. She was the first person who asked about me. The relay alarm pulsed harder around us. Water levels crept another inch higher against the cabinet platform. I have done worse jobs than this, I said softly. That is not an answer. I almost smiled despite everything. Small. Tired. Real. No, I admitted. It is not. The radio crackled violently again. Richard Whitmore's voice burst through this time. Rougher now. Less controlled. Naomi, reporters are broadcasting from the ballroom lobby. We need those gates open immediately. Need. Not order. Not command. Need. That change mattered more than he realized. I secured the final clamp against the bypass contact point. Tiny sparks snapped across the metal bridge instantly. The relay cabinet shuddered beneath my hands. Red warning lights across the panel turned yellow one by one. System pressure surged through the room in a low mechanical roar. Evelyn tightened her grip on the flashlight. Is it working? I looked at the transfer timer beginning to count backward on the cracked display screen. 90 seconds. 89. 88. Then the flood barrier behind us started closing. The flood barrier moved with a deep metallic groan behind us. Slow. Heavy. Unstoppable. Water surged harder through the corridor as the pressure system activated. The relay timer kept counting down on the cracked display screen. 78. 77. Tiny sparks snapped across the bridge clamps beneath my hands. The cabinet vibrated harder now. Evelyn swung the flashlight toward the narrowing hallway opening behind us. How long until it seals completely? She asked. I glanced over my shoulder once. Less than a minute. The red emergency glow pulsed across the moving steel barrier as it lowered inch by inch toward the flooded floor. Once it sealed, the pressure lock would trap us inside the utility section until upper controls manually released. Assuming upper controls still worked at all. Somewhere above us, the building lights surged suddenly. Bright enough to flicker through the relay room ceiling vents. The bypass transfer had reached the main system. Upstairs power was stabilizing. The gates were probably opening right now. I grabbed the radio from beside the cabinet without removing my other hand from the transfer arm. Tom. Static burst first. Then shouting. Running footsteps. Wind. The gates opened, he answered breathlessly. Paramedics are moving now. Evelyn closed her eyes for 1 second after hearing that. Relief moved quietly across her face. Small. Human. The timer continued falling. 65. 64. The relay housing emitted a sharp crack beneath my hand. I tightened my grip immediately to steady the transfer current. The bridge clamps rattled violently against the bypass track. Naomi, Tom's voice came back over the radio, the ballroom regained partial power. I looked toward the cracked relay display. Yellow warning lights flickered unevenly across the panel. The system was holding, but barely. Listen carefully, I said. Once the 90-second bridge cycle ends, the relay cabinet may overload permanently. Silence answered first. Then Richard Whitmore's voice cut through the radio again. Quieter now. Less polished than I had ever heard it. Can the building recover after that? I stared at the soaked maintenance report line visible through my apron pocket. Deferred repair authorization. 90 days. One signature. Not tonight, I answered. The truth settled heavily into the room after that. Upstairs, the gala would survive the storm. The donors would leave eventually. Insurance would cover chandeliers and carpets and ballroom repairs. But underneath all of it, the system Richard chose to ignore was collapsing exactly the way engineers warned him it would. Water splashed harder around our legs as the barrier behind us lowered another foot. Evelyn shifted closer to the narrowing gap instinctively. Naomi, she said softly, the barrier. 52 seconds remained. I looked toward the corridor opening. Then back at the unstable transfer arm beneath my hand. If I let go too early, the gates outside could fail again before the ambulance reached the emergency bay. If I stayed too long, we risked being trapped below the flood seal entirely. Another hard spark cracked against the cabinet housing. Bright blue light flashed across the flooded room. The smell of overheated metal thickened sharply in the air. Evelyn crouched closer beside me despite the danger. How much longer do they need? I pressed the radio harder against my shoulder. Tom. Footsteps thundered through static on his side. Rain. Voices shouting directions. Then finally, they made it inside. My breath left quietly after that. Not dramatic. Just release. Like something unclenched deep inside my ribs. Evelyn exhaled too. The timer dropped lower. 38. 37. We still had to survive the rest of the cycle. The child is stable for now, Tom added. Paramedics are transferring her upstairs. Stable for now. Sometimes those 3 words feel bigger than miracles. The flood barrier groaned louder behind us. Only a narrow opening remained now. Red warning lights reflected across the steel surface like fire underwater. Richard's voice returned once more over the radio. Different this time. Barely above a whisper. Naomi. I waited. Rain hammered the building overhead. The cabinet trembled beneath my hand. I should have listened to you earlier. I looked at the transfer timer. 29 seconds remained. Then I answered the only honest thing left. You should have listened long before tonight. The relay cabinet suddenly emitted one long continuous alarm tone. The continuous alarm tone filled the relay room like a held breath that refused to release. The cabinet shook harder beneath my hand. Water rippled violently around the platform base. 21 seconds remained on the cracked display screen. Evelyn stood beside the narrowing flood barrier opening with the flashlight trembling slightly in her grip. Not panic. Exhaustion. The storm outside hammered the building without mercy now. Pipes groaned overhead. Somewhere deep inside the walls, pumps fought to keep up with water they were never supposed to handle alone. I tightened my grip against the transfer arm as another sharp burst of sparks snapped across the bypass clamps. Heat flashed briefly against my knuckles. The relay system was burning itself apart to hold those gates open. Just long enough. "Naomi," Evelyn called softly, "the barrier is almost sealed." I looked toward the shrinking gap behind her. Barely shoulder width now. Red emergency lights flashed across the steel like distant lightning. If we waited too long, the pressure lock would trap us below until rescue crews manually reopened the corridor. Assuming the building still had enough power for that. The timer dropped lower. 15. 14. I pressed the radio against my shoulder again. "Tom." Static answered first. Then his voice came through clearer than before. "Calmer too. The child made it into emergency care." My eyes closed briefly after hearing that. Just 1 second. Long enough to feel the tension finally loosen somewhere deep inside my chest. Upstairs, faint applause erupted again through the ceiling. Different this time. Not charity auction applause. Relief. Real human relief. Evelyn heard it too. She lowered the flashlight slightly and smiled for the first time all night. Small. Tired. Honest. "They know," she whispered. "Some of them do," I answered. The cabinet shuddered violently beneath my hand. A warning siren burst from the relay housing loud enough to echo through the flooded corridor. Final overload approaching. The bridge cycle was ending. "Naomi," Richard's voice crackled suddenly through the radio again. I almost did not recognize it now. No arrogance left. No polished confidence. Just a tired man standing in the ruins of his own choices. The paramedic said the girl is breathing normally again. I stared at the timer. 8 seconds remained. "Good," I said quietly. Silence followed. Then Richard spoke again. Slower this time. "Careful. I was wrong about you." Water dripped steadily from the ceiling pipes around us. Red warning lights reflected across the flooded floor between my shoes. Somewhere overhead, the ballroom chandeliers probably glowed warm again while soaked maintenance reports floated in utility tunnels beneath them. Funny how truth always hides below expensive things. "No," I answered softly. "You were wrong about what mattered." The timer hit 3 seconds. 2. 1. The relay cabinet released one final violent crack of blue light before every warning lamp died at once. Darkness swallowed the room completely. For one long heartbeat, the entire building seemed to stop breathing with us. Then emergency backup lights flickered softly alive down the corridor. Dim, stable. Quiet. The flood barrier halted inches before sealing completely. Water levels stopped rising. Somewhere far above us, the ballroom generator settled into a smooth steady hum for the first time all night. I slowly removed my hand from the dead transfer arm. My fingers ached from holding tension too long. Evelyn stepped carefully through the remaining barrier gap toward me. The flashlight beam shook faintly across the wet walls around us. "Is it over?" she asked. I looked down at the soaked maintenance report still tucked inside my apron pocket. Then toward the silent relay cabinet. Then up through the ceiling where wealthy strangers were probably finally seeing the workers beneath their polished evening for the first time. "No," I said quietly. "But maybe now it can finally change." Then Evelyn reached down and helped me stand.